All right. All right. Welcome, everybody. It's December 2024, and this is our roundtable for the month. We are going to be talking about multi-sensory worship ideas. So my name is Beth from Key Ministry. I see my colleague Lara is on, and I'm just excited about this conversation we're going to have today. What prompted me to pick this for our topic this month, and I see, yep, Lindsay's on here as well. So the Disability Ministry Network, which is an organization made up of ministry leaders from denominations, from parachurch organizations, so not necessarily individual churches, but organizations that kind of represent more than one congregation, if you will. So we had a retreat / annual meeting in November in Grand Rapids, and we had the opportunity to review data that had come in from, I don't know how many, dozens, hundreds of congregations on the subject of accessible worship, including multisensory worship. And this was part of, so Baylor University kind of compiled all this data, and it was from a grant that the Disability Ministry Network has from the Calvin Institute of Contemporary Worship. So several organizations within the Disability Ministry Network went out and had these kind of listening sessions, gathering information. Key Ministry was one of them. But together as the network, we got to kind of work through some of the data that was presented. And let's see, I know Lindsay was there. I'm looking around to see if anybody else from this call was there. I think we were given the opportunity to work with something like 586 pieces of information that came in through these sessions. So 586 different ideas for multisensory worship, which is incredible. So I just want to open, I'm not directing this, I'm just facilitating it. So I just want to open it up. What does multisensory worship mean to you? What are some ideas that you have? Like what does that word mean to you?
I was recently talking to a friend, and she is fully blind. And I was just asking her about her experience in church. And she was like, yeah, I can't ever, if I don't know the words to the song, I kind of just got to hum it because I don't know the words and I can't read them on the
All right.
screen.
I
And
told him that I'd go down and play foosball with.
so it was just really interesting to hear that perspective. And I've never lived a life blind, so it's never occurred to me that you can't read the words on the screen, and there's no like braille offering, at least in the church that we go to, and we go to the same church. It just never occurred to me. So not that worship is solely like singing,
Right, but
but
that's
that is one experience
yeah,
that is a little challenging for her in the church setting. So
right,
she's a
right.
good sport about it, but yeah.
The words on the screen are one one type of sensory way to use your senses. But yes, that's not accessible for everybody. Good point. Um, in the chat, it says worshiping God with our whole selves and providing ways to experience a worship service with all senses. I love that. Yeah, we were all designed to worship, and so that might look different for different people. And I'm just really excited about some of the ideas we're going to come up with, which I'm going to call on you, Barb, because I know you have some really awesome things to say.
I was going to say, I think multisensory worship is really about offering options. And to your point, KJ, not everything we do is accessible to all people. So when we have more options and different ways for them to express something, then they can kind of do what works for them. I think like in children's ministry, often having some movement involved and engagement and those type of things along with the listening is another way to do it.
Yeah. So it's not just how we're taking it in information, or what's the word I'm looking for? I'm blanking.
I think it's a lot about how we process it. So I think part of multisensory worship is understanding that people process things in different ways. And so for some people, maybe sitting there and listening, they are processing it and internalizing it and getting it, but other people need to move around the room. And so I think part of multisensory worship is allowing people to process it the way that they have to. And real quick, the last thing I'll add on this. So personally, I have one of my sons has pretty severe ADHD.
Mhm.
And I was always telling them when he would start coming to church with us in the adult church, sit up and look like you're listening. Because I sometimes have to speak as a public speaker and I get really upset if people look like they're not engaging. And so I'd look over at him and he would be down like this. He'd have his head down, he'd have his arms up, and I would get really mad at him. I mean, this happened repeatedly. I was like, get up. That is so rude. They're trying to tell you something. And then he told me, he was like, that's the only way I can hear it. Because his ADHD was so bad that the distractions, and out of everyone in our family, he's the one that remembers the sermons the most. So that was like a real eye opener for me, in that multisensory isn't just what we offer, but also allowing people to take it in the way that works for them.
Yeah, I love that. And as a mom, also of a son with ADD, and finding that out later in his life, and I was like, I can't believe I'm the disability ministry leader who did not, who was not giving my own son grace because I didn't understand it.
Me
So,
too.
Yeah. I knew I liked you, Barb. Okay. Julie.
So 2 examples for my Amy, who has very significant hearing loss. One of the things that she needs, and she likes to move too. Barb, you were talking about movement. So one of the things that has been super helpful to her lately, and when we started coming to this church that has huge screens and we sit in the front seat and she can see the screen, she can see the pastor up close when he's preaching, so she can read his lips if she's not hearing what he's saying. So that's a huge thing. But one thing that's been beautiful lately is that she has felt more freedom in moving during the singing, during the worship time with the music. And she has been praised by the members of the choir who are watching her do her little dance thing while she is so, you can tell that she's worshiping from the heart. This isn't just, okay, I need to be, animated and fun. And that's not what it is. She is really taking in the information. So that's one thing that has been really helpful. And then the other thing is that sometimes people need to have multiple things going on, right? So you sitting and listening is a good thing, but if you can't, like your son, Barb, he couldn't listen unless he shut everything else out, right? For Amy, she has to play a game on her phone. So back in the day when people were getting on your case about being on your phone while you were in worship, she couldn't do that, or she didn't feel like she could do that because she's a people pleaser and she wants to make sure everybody's good. But now she has the freedom to do that because the even pastor of our church right now has gone from, you need to bring your paper Bible, to whatever way that you are taking in the Word of God, this is the passage that we are going to do. And I love that transition that he has taken. And Amy can sit there and she can play a game and not feel guilty and not feel like she's doing something wrong. So those things have been really, really helpful for her.
And to me, Julie, what you did, to me, that's one of the biggest things, is kind of understanding that we all take in information, process it, and then respond in different ways. And so as a ministry leader, giving grace, that it's going to look different for different people. And then it might look like, you've got your head down, or you're on your phone. Do any of you know doodlers? Or maybe you are one, and you have to be doodling during a meeting or whatever. Yeah, I see some hands going up here. But 100% you are paying attention, but maybe to the observer, it just looks like you're, tuning out and doodling, but that's how you are taking in the information and processing it. So yeah, yeah, I think we, oh, yes. Yes, I know that roommate. So yes, reminds me of coming as you are. Yes, I think that's like, to me, that's the overriding thing. Like, whatever you need to do to be engaging with that gospel message and responding. Um, so, well, would anybody else like to share before I throw out another question?
This is Lindsay.
Hey, Lindsay.
I think a lot of it has to do with culture. And like you're saying, Julie, your pastor naming that there are different ways to access the word of God. And Barb saying it's about options, right? And so there's culture setting that's so important about just naming things. Like, we learn in different ways. And some of us are gonna sing loudly and some of us aren't gonna open our mouths, but we're really worshiping, and that's okay, right? That God can hear what we're saying when we pray, whether we say it out loud or not, right? So just kind of normalizing the different ways that bodies and minds come and learn. And kind of like you were saying about your son, Barb, I have that with my daughter with her headphones that she wears, because the music, she doesn't even have a diagnosed disability, but she's just sensitive to sound and it hurts her. It's hard for her to be in church, like, especially if there's like, brass instruments or something on a special Sunday. She just can't handle it. So for her to be able to be engaged in worship, she puts her headphones on and she's fine. And it's no big deal. Nobody cares, right? So, but it's like, if I took her to my parents' church, they would be really embarrassed by that. So, yeah, it's a lot about culture. And just, I think the more pastors and worship leaders can name and normalize, sit if you feel comfortable, or stand, like, do what works for you. God doesn't care about these little details that we've made as cultural statements.
Thank you, Lindsay, for sharing. That's a good perspective. So I'm going to just give us a second to brainstorm about some of the different senses. And I'm going to start with some easy ones, and then we're going to work towards some harder ones. But so what are some ways that we can engage the sense of sight? So visual in worship. And somebody's already mentioned slides. What are some other ways to do visual?
We can use the visual signs to remind them what we're engaging in, like worship time, because sometimes I see students, I don't know, get squirrely and like not want to pay attention all the way, and then want to just do it for a little bit and then want to move on. But just reminding them and using the visual that this is worship time. We're still engaging in worship, however that is for you. But just using the visuals I think is super helpful.
Yeah, I am a big fan of visual schedules, and we're seeing that in the chat as well. So whether it's a bulletin or, some kind of visual schedule, whatever, that could look so many different ways. So yeah, thank you, Amanda. I'm also seeing banners, visual art, props, hand movements, actions to songs. So that's both visual and like, movement. Any others? What are some, well, I'll save that one. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about hearing. What are some things that we might incorporate for those who are like listening? Hearing is their way to engage.
I'm just curious, does anyone have something that actually has like a vibration sense to it, like the music I don't know if there is anything like that, but I thought that may be kind of neat for someone that needs to feel.
Oh,
and
interesting.
Or when they're hearing the certain noises, that something that they can touch, but hearing the noise, also feeling something at the same time.
Oh, I love that. Does anybody have any experience with that?
No, just that even people who are deaf actually feel vibrations of music oftentimes. So even if they can't literally hear it, they can experience it. So that's not exactly what you're talking about, but
We might use, there may be a way to use the spoken word when there are visuals. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of watching a movie with captioning to explain everything that's happening that you couldn't otherwise get out of, if you can't see it, it describes the action that's happening. So that's a way to use the spoken word to help describe something that's only visual. I mean, I think we use like different types of music, or like I know in our children's ministry setting, we use a cowbell to indicate when it's time to move from small group to large group. So that's an example of using sound. So in the comments, it says music, ASL interpreter for those who need it. Some appreciate less sound, so headphones might be helpful. And this is a really good, this is what I wanted to bring up. So there is a tension between some of these things, and we're going to talk about some other ones in a minute, but there are those who maybe need sound amplified. And then there are those who would, who do better with less sound. And just like we probably don't all agree on the same music. I mean, these are all parts of what you may experience in a worship setting. And there's not like one easy fix for everybody. And I think we could probably think about a lot of these like, well, what works well for this person does not necessarily work well for this person. Julie.
So another thing that helps Amy with her hearing loss is if people are actually facing you when they talk. So sometimes, a teacher will turn behind her and she's talking about the thing that she's picking up or he's picking up. That just makes Amy crazy. So it's so nice when she can actually see, because she uses lip reading as well as whatever hearing she can get out of her hearing aid in tandem. So just looking at people when we talk and opening our mouths when we talk, because sometimes we mumble and then it's hard for them to hear.
Yeah, I'm with her on that one. I feel like if I don't have my contacts in, I can't hear anything. So Dean is sharing, I can't validate this work, but suspect it is a working version today. And it's from notimpossible.com. And I'm not going to open, I have a hard time navigating, opening the links and facilitating this. But if anybody wants to open it up and chime in on it, please do. And we will share the link when we post the recording. All right. What about incorporating movement into, okay, great, Dean, thanks. I'll read that in a second. What about incorporating movement into the worship setting? What are some examples? We gave some already, but. Dance, worship scarves, motions to songs. Thank you. Got some ideas going in the chat here. Barb?
Okay, this isn't exactly this one, but it's just, I was thinking about it. Smiling, because I have noticed, like, especially in our disability ministry, and this maybe go back to incorporating visuals, but when we train our leaders to smile at the people, that's when they start, you see a lot more engagement. So somewhere in this talk that needs to be in there.
I love that. Thank you. I was smiling as you said it.
oh, good, Barb.
Musical instruments was shared, yes. Motions for memory verse, absolutely. So we're getting ready to do, our church does a sensory friendly Christmas Eve service. And part of well, in my mind, what makes it sensory friendly is, I mean, it's not over the top lights or sound or anything like that. It's, you know, pretty calm. But the biggest thing is it's just the freedom to come as you are, as was mentioned in the chat. If you need to move around, that's totally fine. If, you know, if your loved one is vocalizing, that's totally fine. But we also make it very engaging. There'll be like hand motions and things that we'll teach, and everybody can respond that way. So I think movement is super important in that type of setting. Raising hands, going forward for communion, praise ribbons. Yep. Anytime there's any kind of move, you know, I mean, bowing your head is movement, or, you know, in some congregations you kneel when it's time for prayer, or standing, you know, any of that is using more you know, using your senses, using that and the sense of motion. You know, raising hands, I think that was mentioned. Having a space to move around or walk during service. Yes, definitely. All right, I'm going to throw out, how about the senses of smell and taste? Yeah, Julie.
I just will share something. One of my typically developing daughters has a strong sensitivity to smell. And there were candles in the church we used to go to a long time ago. And we had to make sure that we sat far away from the candles or we could not go to worship service. So those scented things aren't always pleasant for everyone.
Yes, and that's what I said earlier. We're going to talk about some of those tensions. So we had a big discussion. The group I was assigned to during our exercise at the Disability Ministry Network gathering was the sense of smell and taste one. And we had this, there was all these examples that were given, there was this dichotomy of, you know, it's not Advent until you smell the pine, you know, until you have the church is decorated with pine and there's the, you know, the evergreen scent wafting through. And, you know, that's a scent that puts me over the edge. And so how do you know, it's not Christmas till you smell pine, or I'm really allergic to pine. So that's one of those things, like, you have to be careful about how you can accommodate both. Let's see, some other, this one I had never thought of before, but the smell of bread baking during communion. I had never thought about that one before, but some churches do that, I guess with a bread maker or something. Yes, so KJ sharing communion meal and incense in Catholic Mass. Yep. Okay, and I'm going to get to that question in a second, Kristen. Lindsay, do you want to share the you know what I'm going to say? The fish guts is worship.
Oh. Yeah, well, so we did this kind of experimenting with what we were talking about in a worship service. And we were, you know, the passage was about, you know, just making disciples and fishing for people. And so there was an actual like sardines we could taste at one point. I mean, first we smelled them if you wanted to, and then you could taste them. They also had salt water you could taste, signifying the sea. And you could touch it. So there were just different ways that they incorporated, and it was really interesting. I mean, it's interesting to me that we are very accustomed to and grape juice or wine being in our church services, and that's no big deal. But if you were to bring food into like any other way, that would be really kind of weird and novel. Like maybe great, but it would probably rock some people, right? Some people might not be happy if you bring sardines into church. So it is a really interesting thing that we're just super used to it in this one thing that Jesus gave us, but any other form of it feels totally foreign. So, but I like the idea of thinking creatively about how to engage our senses in a broader sense than typically we rely primarily on sound and vision.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to go back through the chat because there's been some things going on. So let me go back first to that website that Dean shared. It says from the site, Not Impossible is an innovation studio that produces content, technology, programming, activations, and partnerships that demonstrate the capacity of mankind to make the impossible not possible. Not Impossible is composed of Not Impossible Labs, Not Impossible Studios, and the Not Impossible Foundation, all aligned in support of a collective mission to change the world through technology and story by addressing societal absurdities or problems to improve the lives of everyone. So there might be some interesting, that might spark some ideas for how we can use that in church world. All right. Also, Kristen asked, does anyone use some sort of live captioning during the service, as in during the service on the main screen while the sermon is happening, so people processing issues can read and listen? I imagine this would be super distracting for others, especially if the live captioning makes mistakes. Oh yes, we've experienced that. I know YouTube can provide that for the stream. It also provides transcripts. We stream on Christian World Media and Facebook only right now. Does anybody have any examples or any recommendations for that? We did, during this Disability Ministry Network gathering, we did use live captioning. And I think it was like literally run through Word or something. Like it was
PowerPoint.
What was it?
It's a new feature of Microsoft PowerPoint.
Okay. And I think, depending on where you were sitting in the room and what kind of learner you, like, you may have just not even noticed that it was going on. I was highly engaged with it, partly because of where I was sitting and partly because that's me. And there were some pretty hilarious errors because it just, it just types what it hears. And they're not always accurate. But I imagine it was very helpful if you do maybe have trouble hearing. So
can I add to that, Beth?
Yes.
I think again, this is the tension. I would lean towards net gain in terms of using this, and again, like closed captioning on Zoom, all these things. But the reason people really push CART and like a human to do the live captioning is because especially if you have someone with a speech difference, whether it's disability related or English as a second language or something like that, then it just doesn't really work. And then that's almost worse because it's putting together on a screen a bunch of words that are not what the person is saying. It's very distracting. And so we had like a man with Down syndrome, like kind of give a testimony, and it butchered it. And it was like embarrassing. I think Eric Carter was pretty embarrassed. So it's just something to think about of like who's going to be speaking, because yeah, I think probably the technology will keep getting better. But and maybe there'll even be technology where like we could do it ourselves live or something, as best we can, or I bet it'll keep evolving. But anyway, that's just like a thing to be aware of. But on the other hand, at the event where there was a different event this summer where we were sharing ideas, and they had set up, it was like a big room with all these tables. And so they wisely had sort of a low sensory environment. And I kind of led the discussion in that space. And in that room, they had live captioning. So even for a group of 5-6 people around a table, it was captioning live. And there were 2 people using that the whole evening. And so it was really cool because I wouldn't have thought to use it in like a small group setting. But that people really, really appreciated that. And for me, like as someone who's overstimulated easily, it was like so nice to be in that quiet room and not in the hustle bustle. Like I could hear myself think, you know. So there's all different reasons that we need different options, but I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, thank you. And there's some, let me just read a few things from the chat related to captioning. So PowerPoint can caption if you use a PowerPoint presentation. Okay, that's related. Hang on, I'll go back to that. There's a study that the current generation turn on captioning for just regular TV. Oh yeah, current gen, yeah. There's a service called Aberdeen that uses live people to transcribe as they listen offsite. It is also Christian, so they're trained on common biblical words and names. And I do want to say that having a service, whether it's ASL interpreting, captioning, whatever, when they're like Christian competent, if that's the right phrase, that is super helpful, because we do have a way of speaking, you know, whether it's not necessarily just scripture, but we as Christians and we as ministry leaders have a little bit of a language that if you're not familiar with this world, you might not understand some of the things. So, all right. Does anybody
And
else?
I'll just say,
Yeah, go ahead,
so
KJ.
I grew up, it's kind of funny. I think sometimes our culture, unfortunately, the culture around us and the schools around us and whatever, kind of finds ways to solve some of these problems before we do, which, you know, we're getting there, you know. But I grew up in a public school that had a really good hearing impaired program, and actually a lot of students were sent to our school from the surrounding areas. Sorry, I don't know why these are popping up. And we actually had people that were employed to come to each of the classrooms and transcribe. They weren't regular keyboards, they were different. I don't know if anybody has experienced this, but yeah, I had never thought of them before, but it would be cool to have like a real human, like maybe out of service, doing that sort of captioning.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, there's definitely benefits for having like actual people. Yeah. And so we'll share the link that's going on in the chat right now. We'll share that about Aberdeen. We'll put that in the recording when we post it. All right, anything else on captioning? If not, I'm going to go back and read some about communion. So yes, the idea of having gluten-free options during communion. Thank you, that's important. Okay. Once had a student who was NPO, so instead during communion, her caretaker would swipe a grape flavored glove in her mouth so she could participate. Oh, that's interesting. So really, yeah, really thinking outside the box. I love that. Anything else on? Okay. Using frankincense at Christmas. So again, that's engaging the senses for the season. Let's see, did I miss anything else? Okay, I think we got it. Yeah, Julie.
Here's another example of taste or not taste. So for years, Amy could not eat anything by mouth, but she wanted to participate in communion. So I love that swipe of the juice. So she can now have food, but it needs to be soft food. So sometimes those little things that come with communion are very hard. So what we have figured out is I always make sure I'm sitting next to her and I always have a tissue so that once she can put it in her mouth and she can do whatever she needs to do with it, but it's never going to dissolve fast enough for moving on. So I just hand her the tissue, she just takes it out and then we move on. So there's another option for, you know, individuals.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, it's engaging, but just in maybe a slightly different way. That's great for thinking through that. Amanda, do you have something? No.
Well, I was gonna say I did experiment with the student, and I got her to try it, which was a huge win because she was very sensitive to certain things and she doesn't normally eat certain foods. But I was able to talk with her about what it was, and she tasted it, but we had to do the whole, she spit it out in a, I was just gonna say that's a great idea. And I just kind of had to on a whim just go, oh, you don't have to like it, you can put it in your napkin. And but because I didn't know how she would respond to it, but I was just trying to figure things out to try it and see what her response was. But it was awesome that she tried it. And her mom did say at home they've done it together as a family, taking communion as a family, and they've given her like an actual grape and just different things that she does like in place of that.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, Barb.
Okay, so this is going back to using taste as another way of teaching with sensory. And I just have to give my food allergy mom PSA. So please remember, if you lead volunteers or teachers, remind them before they ever incorporate any types of food in the classroom, which students have food allergies or maybe need thickened liquids or different things. Because it's been my experience, that we often take all this information and we put it on a little card and we put it in the database. And then when we actually offer these things, we forget to remind our volunteers of the information. And I know when my son, same one who is hiding his head in church, also has anaphylactic food allergies, went to a VBS one time at a church we've been going to for years. They had all his information, didn't remind any of the volunteers. They gave him food he was allergic to. And he was young enough that he didn't know what to do because he felt like I should do what I'm told, but I know I can't have this. Luckily, I was still there, so he asked me. But you cannot be too careful when it comes to food because of the commonality of food allergies. And my last part is, don't assume it's just nuts and a couple common things, because I know kids that are deathly allergic to milk and casein and things you would never even think about. So just always remind your volunteers and look at those food allergies.
That's a very good reminder. I learned that there's an apple allergy.
There's allergies to everything. I mean, you would be, my son, he's allergic to some nuts, which is pretty common. He's also allergic to tropical and exotic fruits. So now that everyone has mango, that's a scare. Like all of these things. And so no one thinks of that.
Right.
So that's why I say when we take that information, we have to remember to actually use it and remind our people who are the hands and feet of what we do.
Right. That's a very good reminder. Thank you. It's
Can I
important.
chime in for a second too on the
Absolutely,
allergy side of
please.
things?
Yes.
So we were talking about senses as well. I have 14 allergens and none of them are anaphylactic, so I'm very grateful. But soy candles, if they start burning, that's a allergen for me. So my throat starts swelling and I can't breathe if a soy candle's burning. But soy is a big one, and I have a weird one of olive oil. And then you just said something about so I can't do olives or olive oil, but you said something about apple juices. I cannot do juices, but I can do a fresh apple. So it's kind of unique. So I throw up juices, but I can eat the apple. And it's something with the enzymes and how it's broken down when they actually squeeze the juices out of the pulp. So if the pulp's with it, I'm good.
Wow, that's amazing. And
so yes.
olives are gross, so that's okay. But olive oil, that would be hard. Very hard.
So yes, and even like running the organization, we have little stickers, and anybody that interacts, we're very aware of where the different individuals have their allergens. So yes, that's a big one.
That's good. Well, and having you at the helm, that's like you're like, this is your thing. And so you're able to equip your other, like your volunteers to be in the know. That's great.
Another, can I jump in? This is Lindsay. Another reminder of that is just like, as we try to do with any accessibility thing. Like I'm watching a kid this afternoon, a neighbor kid, and it's like, does he have any allergies? Like anything I need to know, like just setting the tone of like, it's on the registration for the weekend youth group retreat. It's on the, like, just putting it on all the places always. And also just communicating things ahead of time, right? Like that's so helpful for people with autism and anxiety and things like that. But to say we're planning to use this during the worship service on Sunday, put it in the Friday email. If that's a concern for you, please let us know. We don't want, we want everyone to be able to be there and participate. So if, we won't do it if there's someone that it doesn't work for. So please let us know if that's not going to work for you. But just like giving people a heads up of these kind of creative things can be really helpful in lots of ways.
Yeah, yeah. And in the chat, there's an example of that. So Andrea shared that last VBS, she was having a conversation with her kidmin pastor. He was just going to give marshmallows to those that couldn't have a snack one day because he figured they were safe, but her son would have had a reaction to the gelatin in them. So she reminded him, you always have to ask. And yeah, that's what we think may be just a, no big deal. There's couldn't possibly be anything wrong with it. Clearly, there are all kinds of allergies that people have. So that's good info. All right. Any other ideas? Did we forget any of the senses? Smell, taste, sight, hearing, touch. Oh, touch. Like, what are some things that maybe could be, so when Lindsay was sharing that worship service that we did at the Disability Ministry Network, they had fishing nets that we could feel while we're listening to the story and being able to kind of react to the story. I know in our children's ministry we've used like different like for certain certain lessons, offering fidgets, that's good. Yes, anything that you can touch or manipulate, either to reinforce the lesson or because that's kind of what your brain needs to be a good listener.
Beth, the other thing that I really loved at that event was we had a time of prayer and everyone was given a stack of cloth, like these little squares of cloth, all different colors. And we were just instructed to kind of make a path, like a labyrinth, like a maze, basically, collectively, quietly. And it was kind of like pray for whatever comes to mind when you see the color. So it was just such a different way into prayer for me. And I ended up thinking about like thanking God for such ordinary things I wouldn't normally thank God for, or like it would remind me of some old memory just by the color of it, reminded me of a fabric of somebody's dress, or, like it was just so cool. The tactile experience of touching it and setting it down. And it was just a really moving experience. So that's a super simple thing you can do.
Yeah, and the fabrics were not just different colors, but different textures. Yeah, just like little squares like that. Yeah, good one. And look, we have a couple pages worth of people on here now, so I'm just making sure we're not missing anybody. I'm trying to think if there were so many clever ideas that came up through this, and you will eventually have access to all of these ideas, because there will be a report that comes out. Yes, experiential learning. So that's okay. So yeah, Lindsay, thank you. Experiential learning, and how can we use that to really engage, to engage individuals with the gospel message. So can anybody give me some examples of how they are, whether it's like one-on-one teaching or teaching in a classroom, maybe not even necessarily in a worship setting, but how you are allowing and helping students like really engage through through like action and engaging all the senses. So lighting candles, holding a rock, touching water, communion itself is an active way of participating. Good. Anything else? And Tanya, I'll answer your question in a second. Yeah, in the children's messages, that's a good point. Like acting out a Bible story. Yep. I mean, certainly some people are definitely kinesthetic learners, but kids in general, I mean, can learn more when they're engaged and active in the activity and not just hearing it.
I think
Oh, go ahead.
puzzles, like photos, pictures of like that you can print from the slide that you use to put the puzzle together for the lesson that it's over. Instead of talking about the lesson, you can discuss the lesson, and the child can, or the teen can put a puzzle together while you're doing that, and that's hands-on.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways you can reinforce the message and allow them to respond and, demonstrate what they've learned other than just hearing it and, answering a question. So yeah, I love that idea. Adaptive books are another one, where especially if a student is maybe minimally verbal, or, spoken word is not their primary mode of communication, they can respond and show you what they've learned by matching up icons or, that type of thing. Yeah, we're big fans of adaptive books around here. Tanya asked about the report. Yes, this will be, the Disability Ministry Network will be, and Baylor is heading up this, how the study is going to be disseminated. But yes, you'll definitely be hearing about that in this next year. Using Play-Doh and clay. Yep, any time you can have that movement. Social stories about special services or events. Yeah, that's really important. It can help with anxiety, helps a lot of folks. Any other thoughts? All right. Yep. Lindsay shared a link. Lindsay, is that for
So that is the Baylor Flourishing Together resource that was created out of one of the listening sessions. So there were quite a few organizations who were part of this grant. That was one of the listening sessions that happened, and they gathered up this really great resource, which I've been using with volunteers to help kind of bring new ideas to the table. So it's really helpful. And I will drop in an article about our event too.
Oh,
it's a cool thing to do. We had so much fun. The event we did, it was worship without words. So it wasn't about disability, like it was, but we didn't market as such. So we got mostly worship directors and pastors who were planning worship, who were like, oh, we need creative worship ideas. And then that was our way in to talk about, actually, when you use the senses in all different ways, you're creating access. So it was a totally different way into the disability conversation, and attracted people who would not probably have signed up to something that was called disability ministry related.
Right. And I think that's a super good point right there. Like, yes, this is the Disability Ministry Video Roundtable, but all these things that we're talking about are not just for people with disability. Like this can help all of our congregations. So yes, that's very important. One more thing in the chat. Using spelling to communicate boards to have children pray. There's all different ways to engage kids with prayer. Yeah, and I think that's an idea, having pictures they can circle, for who they're praying for or what they want to pray for. And Ryan noted it's important to engage non-disability people in terms of what they think is important already. Disability affects everything. Great, great, great. Well, I think that's a wonderful note to end on. So, hey, thank you all for contributing today. I would love to hear anytime if you incorporate any of these ideas into your worship services or your classrooms. Hey, Barb's dog. And we will post this recording like we always do on our Vimeo and YouTube channels, and we'll include the links that were shared today. So thank you all. Have a very Merry Christmas, and we will see you in 2025.